minute.
We have to look serious and
put the tie on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, this is kind of annoying that we have to take this step to make it happen, but yeah. Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to this episode of Strong Talk. We have several fantastic guests today. We're going to be discussing an article that Chuck wrote on Tuesday about a dangerous street in Springfield, Massachusetts. He wrote it as an open letter to the city with some proposals for how he could help to make it safer. So we have Chuck on here today. He's the president of Strong Towns, and he'll be talking more about that in a minute. We also have Steve Shultis, who is a longtime resident of Springfield, and he's also a guest writer and member of Strong Towns. And then we have Jason DeGray, who is a transportation planner, also a member of Strong Towns, and is also from Springfield, although he currently lives outside of Boston. So thank you guys for being here to discuss this important topic today. Chuck, if you'd like to get started by just telling us about that article that you wrote and what inspired you to write this letter to the city, that would be great.
Yeah, thanks, Rachel. Back in 2014, in December of 2014, a guy named Jason DeGray drove me into the city of Springfield and dropped me off at the home of a guy named Steve Shultis. And between the two of them, I got a really good tour of Springfield and some good understanding of the city, the challenges. We had some engagements planned, and I did a couple of presentations, did a curbside chat. The night that I spent at Steve's house, this terrible tragedy occurred. A mom and her daughter, along with her niece, were crossing State Street. There's a parking lot across the street from the public library. They were at the children's part of the public library, and at closing time crossed the street and were struck. The one little girl was killed, the other one seriously injured, and the mom taken to the hospital as well. We wrote about it at the time and podcasted about it and talked about it because it's kind of the quintessential example of the urban street where there's lots of people, lots of humanity, lots of complexity. Yet it has been designed clearly for one purpose and one purpose only, and that is to move people at speed. Steve's daughter, and he can talk about this when it's his chance, is documented way before this how people cross this street routinely and how the design that the engineers have chosen to implement there completely ignores the reality on the ground. It pretends that people don't exist. And where it is acknowledged that people exist with this little, kind of decorative fence and a couple hedges, it's more of a CYA, a cover your behind kind of thing. We're going to pretend that we care. So we've kept an eye on this, and over time, people have sent me, because people are aware that we're watching this. People in the community, people who have been passing through, have sent me pictures and photos. Heck, you can go on Google Maps and see in Street View, almost every Street View picture from the last 7-8 years. Every time they take a photo of this corridor shows people crossing the street. So people keep sending me stuff. And I said, you know what? Nobody's done anything here. There's all kinds of public outrage. There's all kinds of public protests, and people know something needs to be done, and nothing has. So I wrote an open letter this week to the city of Springfield and said, hey, 2 options. Option number 1, let's sit down together and I'll volunteer to work with you to try to figure out how we fix this and make it work for people. Option number 2, I'm making myself available to whoever wants to bring a lawsuit against you for gross negligence and for damages for people being injured in this intersection. You're clearly not doing the things that are responsible as a government entity controlling this street. So we'll see where that goes, but we put that out there, and I'm hoping we can do the former, not the latter. But if someone is hurt and injured out there, there's some current precedents in the tens of millions of dollars range of damages being awarded when cities ignore this kind of situation. And I would like to see the city of Springfield step up and do the right thing.
Yeah, and I would also add just one piece to that article that you wrote, Chuck. You pointed out in there, the city is clearly aware of what's happening, and they actually have done some things, which is put up some bushes, build some barriers to try to prevent people from crossing, which we are human beings, so we're going to figure out a way to cross because it's a logical thing to do. That's just an important also part to add to that.
You have the desire paths that are there. I mean, they're not able to be, they're in every photo going back to 2007, showing where people are walking. The city's clearly aware of this. Like you said, they've taken some feeble attempts to address it, but they've chosen to ignore the overall larger problem. I think if I was their attorney or their insurance company, I would be really, really concerned, because it's not like they're ignorant of this. It's not like they've set up some standard that they're just following. They clearly have engineered a very dangerous place. They're well aware of it, and they're taking no action.
Definitely. So, Steve, can you tell us about your perspective on this as a resident? I'm sure you walked the street many times, and your daughter had filmed the video of this. Yeah, talk about that.
My daughter made the video specifically because she grew up right across the street. My wife and I bought a condo at the Classical High condominiums, which is where I went to high school. And living in a condo there, my daughter's front yard and backyard playground was the quadrangle, which is the area in behind the library. So we crossed at the crosswalk that was there anywhere from 2 to 20 times a week. And it was the very first crosswalk that my daughter Shayla ever crossed by herself. She asked if she could go to the library by herself. She was 10 or 11. And I said yes. And then, spied on her the whole way and ran across the street. And so when the news came down that the city was receiving federal funds to redo the State Street corridor, in the neighborhood, we all knew that the one thing we cared about, and this is not overstating it at all, the only thing we cared about when it came to the quote unquote improvements on that road was a safer crossing to the library, because we had seen too many near misses and too many accidents, including at least one fatality that I can recall right before the time of the redevelopment. We got a lot of great response from everyone in the city until we met with the then DPW director, who's not DPW director now. It was clear that he was only in the meeting because he was told that he had to meet with members of the community. We spent an hour, we educated ourselves, and we went in and we used the right terminology for the time, traffic calming. And we said, what can we do? There's still cobblestone underneath the asphalt here. Can we reveal the cobblestone, change, the surface? That'll slow cars down. Can we put in a traffic light? Can we put in a blinking light? Can we put in a pedestrian signal? No. And I'm just going to, leave a recording of the word no and leave, and I'll come back in an hour. The answer is no, we're going to do what we're going to do. So that's why, fast forward, when they just did what they did, which is, you spend, I can't imagine how much money in that huge staircase to angle people down to the, next crosswalk down the hill and do all that. That's why my daughter made the video, because it was important to us as a family, and she made it. And as I think Chuck has mentioned before, the tone of the video it's comical. But then when you realize what happened less than 2 years later, a 7-year-old girl losing her life, a cousin's life changed forever, and a mother who will forever have to live with what happened that evening, it makes it bitter. Needless to say, following up from that, neighbors, people who are part of the community where Destiny Gonzalez went to school, have sought to get some kind of a response from the city. And what we've got is nothing. What we've got is no. There's nothing we can do. That's the way streets work. You shouldn't cross here. Everyone should go down to the crosswalk. So that's really, going back for 20 years, we've seen this problem. And all that's been done is essentially ignoring human nature and saying, let's cover CYA and make sure that it looks like it's the pedestrian's fault if something happens.
So Jason, as an engineer, transportation engineer, how would you respond to this situation? What would you tell the engineers in this community?
Well, I mean, I would tell the engineers in this community that something obviously needs to be done to, ensure the safety of and attractiveness of the civic heart of the city of Springfield. This to me, as Chuck said, is the quintessential case study. It really illuminates the, transformative experience that the profession is undergoing. And what I would say, I think in many instances would be vastly different than what the majority of my contemporaries would say.
Mm-hmm.
But I think what is really key to take away here is for the engineering profession to, reflect on what exactly is their ethical responsibility in this case and speak from an ethical standpoint. That's where the profession really has some growth to do. If nothing else, the safety and well-being of the general public is our modus operandi as engineers. And we have to do better to adhere to that. And, I just also know from, practicing in this area and having a little bit of the inside baseball knowledge of it, the city of Springfield would be quick to tell you that they're destitute. And, the only reason State Street was rehabilitated, as Steve mentioned, was they received a federal grant and it was basically implemented outside of their control. I find that to be fairly ironic when not feet from, where we are is a, multi-million-dollar casino going in the ground. And it really speaks to the, environmental justice elements of how a city of Springfield evolves and, with this economic development boom supposedly, having arrived.
Mm-hmm. Well, one of the things that we talk about at Strong Towns a lot, and that's part of our key presentation that Chuck often gives, the Curbside Chat, is a description of what priorities engineers have and what priorities people have, the general public when surveyed. And usually for the people, it's safety first, and then maybe, capacity, speed when we're talking about roads. But for engineers, it often seems like the priority is number one, speed. So Chuck or Jason, how does that disconnect impact what's happening here? Why can't the people and the engineers get on the same page?
Let me start as the engineer advocate and then let Jason as the practicing engineer modify what I say a little bit, because I think his voice is really important in this because he's closer to the flesh of the people who actually have to make these changes. Engineers, we often, when we look at things, say that we don't bring any values to the equation. We are valueless. We're just applying standards, and the standards have no values. And one of the things that at Strong Towns we try to point out is that there are values inherent in the way we present those standards. When engineers start with a street design, the first question they ask is, what is the design speed? And then they'll say, what is the anticipated volume of traffic? And then given those two like unmovable parameters, I mean, those are the givens that you start with, then you start to look at, well, how do we then design this to accommodate those two things and at what cost? I've asked thousands of people around the country and audiences everywhere to think about those values and actually apply them to their streets. And what they always say is that the most important thing for us on our streets, now this is not the highway in between Springfield and Hartford or Springfield and Boston. On those places, yes, we're certainly worried about speed and volume. But when we get to the local street, like State Street, where it's the heart of the community, where it's the middle of town, the highest priority is no longer speed. The highest priority becomes safety. And speed actually goes way, way down on the list. Unfortunately, as engineers, as a profession, we have a really, really hard time coming to grips with that different value set. We cling to the values that we were essentially taught and have been practiced for a long, long time that start with design, speed, and volume, and then proceed from there. I don't think that any of these people in the Department of Public Works are necessarily bad people. I think they just have an antiquated set of values that they're applying, and they would be well served, and their leadership in the city government would be well served asserting a different set of values.
Yeah, I would echo, everything you said, Chuck. It really hits right to the heart of the matter. The values that you state, I think there's really two things. You do have the sense that this system has been codified and an inherent bias towards mobility at all costs that's permeated the profession since, essentially it's a formation. And that needs to be confronted and taken down. The codification is a very difficult discussion, because many feel trapped that even with, being mindful of these values, they feel that they don't have the authority to step out and really be the disruptors. And I think engineers need to empower themselves to understand we are the gatekeepers, and we do need to empower ourselves to use our voice and speak openly. The other piece of this is the values of the general public that we're speaking to. And, the processes that are set up around projects like this speak to a certain populace who, has the ability to attend a public meeting, spoken in English, from 7 to 8 o'clock at night. It's not set up necessarily to welcome in those individuals whose values would demand a better, safe street. And that's another part of the equation that needs to be addressed as well. But at the end of the day, engineers and our values are reflective of the cross section of, the populace that we serve. And, while we're seeing the balance change in terms of those of us who feel differently about urban transportation, we still have a ways to go before we get to a critical mass that really will self-change the system.
I want to go back to the topic of who has authority over this, because that comes up a lot. A politician says this is just the engineer says this is just the rule book. Who actually has the authority? Like, how can people in all these levels of authority actually take responsibility instead of saying no, as Steve said, and pushing the blame? Anybody can respond to that one.
I'll start with that. I think there have been some really good, and Ian Lockwood is clearly the expert on this. There's some really good language in the standard green book, the AASHTO guideline book, that says, these are guidelines. Use common sense. When you're in a non-highway situation, there are other priorities you have to balance. I mean, AASHTO has done, I think, a fairly they've done a bad job of communicating it, but a good job of codifying the flexibility that I think engineers would like to think that we actually have. I think a lot of this gets back to liability, and which is the reason why I presented the letter on Tuesday the way I did. There's a lot of protection from a city standpoint, from an engineer's standpoint, in following established norms and procedures, even if those norms and procedures are despotic, destructive, dangerous. You can always fall back and say, well, hey, I'm just doing what everybody else is doing. And as an engineer, we're called to we have a higher calling. We're actually asked to think and not merely just apply rote standards. And the AASHTO guidelines give you the flexibility to do that.
So we've heard through the grapevine, and I know Chuck and Steve have both done some press interviews that are coming up, that the word is getting out about this story, and Chuck's letter specifically. And obviously, I'm sure there was a ton of press around the death of those people earlier. What would you guys do about this? What would you want to see the response to this attention being given to the situation? Steve, maybe let's start with you. What would be like the best outcome, and is it possible?
I'm going to start at a slightly different place and then end up there. Chuck, Luna Lucia.
Yeah.
You were here. There's that great picture that I posted on my blog where the two of you are doing this. Remember that?
That's Steve's daughter. She's a beautiful kid.
Yeah. And she's 10. She turned 11 in October. And we had a conversation just yesterday where she was talking about this summer. She's a reader. She wants to go to the library by herself.
Mm-hmm.
She's right at that same age that Shayla was when she crossed that crosswalk for the first time. For me, this is so far beyond theoretical. She's gonna do that. And she could be killed by a car going too fast.
Mm-hmm.
No lawsuit against the city of Springfield would bring her back. So, but I understand that what we need to do is fairly simple. The cars need to be slowed. There are ways of doing that. I could do it, and I'm not an engineer.
Yeah.
So the idea that engineers couldn't do it is ridiculous. I need this to happen because the lives of people that I know and love are at risk. I have to tell one little story. I was walking with little Lucia along State Street, not right up by the library, but further down by the Mass Mutual Center. And it had rained earlier. I had an umbrella, and Lulu couldn't get her. Lulu had an umbrella, and she couldn't get it closed. And I was trying to close her umbrella. She couldn't get it. She gave it to me. I closed it, and I said, because I'd finally successfully closed the umbrella, I said, okay. And she thought I meant it's okay to cross.
Mm.
She stepped down into State Street. There were cars coming down 40, 45 miles an hour. She's alive today because I grabbed her and pulled her back. And that's not heroic. I was an idiot for just saying to, she must have been 6 at the time, just okay at the edge of the sidewalk. That video from April that I sent you, Chuck, that you posted with the letter of the mom and the little girl waiting in the middle of the road, right? And you can see the little girl, right, leaning forward and the mom kind of pulling her back. And then the last car goes by and they sprint.
Mm-hmm.
We're people. We shouldn't have to live like this under the despotic control of the master automobile, which is allowed to kill us if we're in the wrong place at the wrong time. It doesn't have to be this way. And it's up to Jason and Chuck and the other engineers to make it happen. But as a resident who still lives on the other side of State Street and who still has to cross to the library and who's going to be going to the new Dr. Seuss Museum across that same State Street, I think the cars can slow down 10 miles an hour, 15 miles an hour, and make that whole area more pleasant for all of us. How they do it, I don't care. And that's not my job. But it's my job to say, get it done. I'm the one paying the taxes. I'm the one for whom the city is being built. Why don't you do a better job?
Yeah.
You know, personally, I would like to see, this result in leadership, exerting itself. There's so much leadership that the engineering profession can do on these topics. And I think that, we could talk at length, and we probably will, about the failings of the engineering profession. I have to say as well, it's a failure of leadership in the full range of city governance. If the mayor of the city of Springfield were to come out and make a statement and say, the safety of our citizens is of the utmost peril, and I'm instructing our engineering staff and our DPW staff to go out and set forth and retool our city streets so that they're safe for walking environments, I would guarantee you would see the reaction of the engineering community change quite quickly.
And it's amazing how quickly, if it's crime, that'll happen. They'll be out there saying, we're going to make the community safe. But if you're murdered, apparently that's bad. But if you're hit by a that not as bad. It's unbelievable how that gets overlooked.
And Steve, just on staying on that point, as well as I do, in the city of Springfield, in that region, the white flight that occurred out of Springfield in the 50s, and it's probably analogous to many other places. There is a undertone of racism here that basically says, I'm not going to go to the city of Springfield because I may be murdered just walking down the street. And you've done such a great job of articulating the point that you actually have a higher likelihood of being killed by just attending the strip malls in some of these outer ring suburbs. And when you make that point, there's like a logical acceptance of, well, you're right, but there's really not the intent behind the tragic, accident, and I'm using that term
Mhm.
appropriately, that, it absolves everyone of any really responsibility. And that, unfortunately, is where I think we have some work still to do to get people past this ingrained bias in their own, sense of what is an acceptable lifestyle and what their values are for their own environment.
There are three things that I'd like to see happen here. The first one has to deal with leadership. And I think that is the elected leaders and the department heads, the professionals involved in the city of Springfield saying, like, look, this design doesn't represent our values. It doesn't represent the values of the community. Here are what those values are. And primary among them is that it's going to be safe for the people who live here. The second thing I would like to see then is, if it has to be retraining, I don't know what it is, but essentially, like, that different set of values then implemented either in the DPW or in whoever's going to be in charge of designing streets out there. There are lots of great engineers around this country doing traffic calming projects in similar circumstances. There's a lot of case work here that's been done to show that when we design things differently, we can actually move traffic at high volumes and with low travel times, but in relative safety to other people outside of an automobile. I would like to see the resources be dedicated to getting, if the people at the Springfield DPW are saying we can't do this, I would like to see them get the proper training so that they realize that they can. There's lots of people out there doing it. Let's get them connected to those people. The third thing I'd like to see then is just an ongoing ethic that says we're going to put people on these streets first. If there is some type of incident where someone is hit, struck, and hit, I would like to see the city conduct an NTSB type of analysis. Let's go out there and figure out what contributed to this. What were the factors? We can't just write it off as someone speeding or someone, driving under the influence or what have you, and just pretend this didn't happen. Let's look at all the factors, the way the NTSB does with airline crashes, and let's actually see what's happened here. If we determine, and I think the city of Springfield should determine that, 15 to 20 miles an hour is the safe max speed you can have on these urban streets. That's the speed you need to lower the threshold of people, getting killed. If you go out there and you do a speed study and you find that the 85th percentile speed is 40 miles an hour, you got to redesign, and you got to keep iterating and keep redesigning until you reach your design speed, your target speed. I think we can use data, and I think we can use a different set of values and ethics applied out here to, over time, get at something that is going to be good for people, and also, be able to move vehicles at a respectful speed. And by the way, I'll just throw that as a last thought, because Jason said, the city's struggling financially. Part of the reason the city struggles financially is because it's a great place to drive through, but not necessarily a great place to set up a business or live. We changed that equation, and what we find in other cities around the country is that when they slow down vehicles, when they actually put people first, the financial part starts to take care of itself too. You get more incentive for investment, more incentive for people to want to live there and be there, and it really helps your financial equation in the end. So I think we can solve multiple problems here at once, but it's going to take leadership to start.
Yeah. Well, thank you guys. That's all we have time for. But for those people who are watching, I encourage you to read this article that Chuck wrote, and also many of the pieces that Steve has written about Springfield. And hopefully we'll see some press coming out of this in the near future as well.
What is Steve's website, so everybody knows that?
That is rationalurbanism.com.
Mm-hmm. And we've published several of your pieces on our site as well.
Yeah,
I'd like to get a shameless plug in here too, because Chuck brought up my colleague Ian Lockwood, and he's a colleague of mine here at Tool Design Group, and we are hoping to aid just those communities we've talked about in undertaking these efforts.
Well, and I Tool Design Group is one of the groups that I strongly recommend around the country as being people who are innovative in this and pushing it. So I'm very grateful that Rachel, you were able to get both Steve and Jason on with us today. So thank you.
Definitely. Thanks everyone, and have a great weekend.
Thanks.